Now, for more analysis on this situation still developing in Iran, we're joined by Herzberg, NGO Monitor's legal advisor and United Nations representative there. So thanks for being with us on us. Come to us from Jerusalem today. So looking at all the images from Iran, and of course, some of the pieces in this report, I mean, we've seen some gutsy displays right here by women who are deciding, hey, I'm just not going to cover my hair today, bringing all the attention on them that potentially brings. What do we know about what's bringing the people to the streets now? Is this an actual anti-regime movement or not quite yet?
Well, I mean, I think these types of protests have been going on for a while now. They just haven't been getting enough attention in the media and within the UN, for instance. So I think because this event was so egregious and the treatment of Mahsa Amini, that, this again was another straw that broke the camel's back and are bringing people out into the streets. And I believe also because it was in a Kurdish region, this is another area where the people have very limited rights. And so I think, things are really reaching a boiling point in the country.
Yeah, we know these issues always simmering just under the surface here. You mentioned that the Kurdish factor here, which is touching on that added sensitivity in the country. But on the plight of women in Iran today, this is long an issue. As you mentioned, this isn't certainly not the beginning of any protests on this. This is a peak moment, perhaps, of it in recent times. But how tough are these morality police in the country on women?
Yeah, I mean, the whole structure dealing with women in Iran is really outrageous. It's been in place since the Islamic regime in 1979. And women's lives are curtailed in almost every area of life. They have very little freedom of movement. They can't leave their house without, covering up. And, they can't express themselves freely. So, this is something that's been a human rights issue for decades and really has not been a focus of attention for the international community, sadly.
Well, along those lines, and this is in your arena here, Iran is on the United Nations Women's Rights Commission, if I'm not mistaken, right now, and even for another 4 years. I think their term has relatively just begun. So in the backdrop of all this reality and the fact that they're looking out apparently for women's rights at the UN, are world leaders saying anything? Are they paying attention at this point? What are the potential reactions on this biggest of world stages for around this issue?
Yeah, I mean, there has been Anthony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, issued a tweet condemning the killing and calling for, rights for women in Iran. But really, there's been too little attention to this issue. As you mentioned, Iran is on the UN Women Commission. Iran is influential in other UN frameworks. And there's really a lot of apologists for the regime within UN frameworks. And there's clearly not enough attention being paid to the human rights apparatus towards Iran. And we also see that amongst NGOs, groups like Amnesty, Human Rights Watch. They've said very little about this in contrast to what they say in other situations.
Yeah, I mean, here you have literally women just protesting one word for it, walking down the street, seeking basic freedoms of how they can appear in public, essentially, and not getting much traction internationally. I mean, we've seen uproars in other situations recently, certainly involving Israel, as we're used to here now. Does that aspect of the story surprise you? Just obviously not a new angle either. The fact that there's just a lopsided reaction, let's say, to certain issues, a lack of attention on others in Iran.
Yeah, I mean, it's the reaction does not surprise me, just given that the human rights community, including the UN Human Rights Office and the High Commissioner for Human Rights, are clearly engaging in human rights advocacy based on political ideology, political affiliations. And unfortunately, and I don't know if this is a function of their funding or other alignments, but they are often apologists for the Iranian regime. They fail to speak out about it. And let's contrast that with the situation a few months ago with the accidental death of the journalist Shireen Abu Akleh in the West Bank. She was involved in a conflict zone. There was fighting taking place, and she was accidentally killed, probably by the IDF, but that's still not conclusive yet. The outrage by groups like Human Rights Watch, by Amnesty International, by UN officials, constant outrage. We're still seeing all of this forensic investigations going on, and compare that to what we're seeing with the death of this young woman who was murdered and tortured by the Iranian regime for the simple act of going out on the street wearing a scarf that showed a little bit of her hair. And, human rights groups that should be standing up and supporting local Iranian women have done very little to do so.
Does all this to speak to what appears to be largely the impunity of the Iranian regime on the world stage when it comes to virtually anything? I mean, they know in some ways they've got leverage over the U.S. and other countries when it comes to the nuclear issue. Are they acting as if basically they're untouchable?
Yeah, I mean, I think so in a lot of ways. And I think they've been getting a free pass for their, what I consider to be crimes against humanity against their own people. And especially also what they've been doing in Syria and other places around the world, their funding of global terrorism, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen. And unfortunately, the international community, because I guess they're so wedded to trying to get this nuclear deal that Iran will probably violate anyway, have really been turning a blind eye to the other things that the regime is doing.
Ann Herzberg joining us from Jerusalem. Thank you again for your time on the program here. We'll stay tuned on this issue, see where it goes.
Thanks so much for having me.